My name's Amelia Martins, and it is my great honor to serve as the current president of the Kentucky State Poetry Society. And before we get started tonight, I just wanted to acknowledge that we have lots of friends and lots of neighbors in Eastern and Southeastern Kentucky who are currently impacted, like deeply impacted by the recent flooding, including our friends and especially our writer friends that were at the Appalachian Writers Workshop when the flooding started. So there are a number of ways to help and support people, and people are going to need our help and support for a very long time. So I'm going to put a couple of links that I'm sure that you're all familiar with into the chat. Apple Shop has done a really great job of continuing to update their resources, their list of resources for people. And I'm going to add that here in just a second. And then even today, there was an update from Hyman about things that they needed. So let me make sure that I'm putting all those things in. If you have resources that you want to share, links that you want to share, ways that people can be useful and be of support to people in need, feel free to put those in the chat. I know that this is a very thoughtful group of people, and our hearts are hurting for people. So if there's a link you want to share, go ahead and put that in the chat. But this is something that's going to go on for a long time, and it's going to need our attention for a long time. So as a statewide organization of creative people, I'm sure that we can be creative in how we support the people that are in need. So I do want to acknowledge that before we start. Tonight is a featured reader, and we are especially excited to have Marianne with us. But next month will be the KSPS members open mic, and Kathleen Gregg hosts that reading. It will be September 20th. The sign-up sheet, I'm from the 1980s. The sign-up list will be available online, I believe, after September 1st. So if you have not read and you are a member of the Kentucky State Poetry Society, we would love to have you read. If you have read in the past, we would love to hear you again. If you are not yet a member of the Kentucky State Poetry Society, this is one incentive for you that you can read during these member events every other month. So please look for that reading, sign up for that reading. It will be September 20th. Sign up sheet is coming to you soon. Let me let in one more person. I did put a link up about our conference. So we have had wonderful experiences the last couple of years during the pandemic, having a virtual conference. Attendance has been incredible. The writers and participants that we've been able to draw nationwide has been incredible. This year, we have decided to continue to offer the virtual events while also making an opportunity for people to gather together in person if you'd like to do that. So the conference will be October 8th and 9th. The in-person part of it, if you'd like to come to that, will be on the campus of Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green. The virtual events will be wherever you are located. But if you sign up for the conference, you can choose to attend virtually, you could choose to attend in person, you could come to Bowling Green and do your virtual conference, you could come to Bowling Green and do your in-person conference. So we are trying to meet everyone's needs with this year's conference, but signups are available now. Sarah has opened the registration. There is a sneak peek on our website. Amazing poets, like so many amazing poets are part of this year's conference. So we are really excited. Crystal Wilkinson, our Kentucky State Poet Laureate, will be our keynote speaker. and she will be doing an in-person event in Lexington at the library. And so that will be in person if you want to be in Lexington. It will be virtual for those of us who are at WKU. So that's pretty exciting. And that reading, that keynote reading, is always free and open to the public. Okay, I think those are most of my notes. Now let me get to the reason that you are here tonight. So first I want to say happy anniversary to Marianne. I noticed that it was your anniversary, I believe yesterday. That's really exciting. I loved your picture that you put up. But Marianne Worthington is co-founder and editor of Still the Journal, an online literary magazine publishing writers, artists, and musicians with ties to Appalachia since 2009. Her work has appeared in Oxford American, Calyx, Sweet, Long Ridge Review, and Cheap Pop, among other places. She received the Al Smith Fellowship from the Kentucky Arts Council and arts grants from the Kentucky Foundation for Women and the Berea Appalachian Sound Archives Fellowship. She co-edited Piano in a Sycamore, Writing Lessons from the Appalachian Writers Workshop, and is author of a poetry chapbook. Her poetry collection, The Girl Singer, was released in late 2021 from Fireside Industries, an imprint of University Press of Kentucky, and won the Weatherford Award for Poetry in 2022. Marianne grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, lives, writes, and teaches in Southeast Kentucky. Her book is amazing. I tried to just mark a couple things, and this is what happened. So if you do not yet have a copy of this book, you need a copy of this book. You probably need a couple because you're going to want to give them away also. But please welcome Marianne.
Thank you so much, Amelia. How sweet. That's a really nice introduction. And thank you for mentioning the flooding. Roberta Schultz, who is here, and Aaron Reed, who is here, were all, and myself, we were all at Heinemann on the night that the flooding started. In fact, Aaron Reed is the person who woke me up in the middle of the night and told me to get out of bed and get out of the building and get to high ground. So thank you, Aaron. I'll be forever grateful for that. So I thought I would just read a few of the poems from the book, and then if there's time, I'll read a few new poems that I've been working on. So The Girl Singer is partly about women who forged paths into early commercial country music. But it's not solely about them, but the first part of the book is about them. And I thought I would start there. So really the title poem is a combination of all kinds of women that I grew up seeing on television and hearing on the radio. And I sort of, combined them into one person who I called the Girl Singer. And you may know that there's a history of that term in country music. And it was, and maybe continues to be, kind of a derogatory term, because what it meant was that a woman was sort of the second fiddle to the main act, which was always men. And men usually had control over these women in what they wore and what they said on stage and the kinds of costumes that they had to wear, especially the very early women who were part of barn dance radio. So I'll start with the title poem, The Girl Singer. And if you are familiar with some murder ballads, you might hear lyrics from songs that you will recognize, because I sprinkled some of the lyrics into this poem. Also, I'm going to try to read from my screen, which means I'll have to cut away from you. And so if something bad happens, somebody's just going to have to open their mic and say stop, or okay, because I won't be able to see you. All right, here's The Girl Singer. How hard it was to hold my body against defeat and come to be known as just a girl singer by those men who said, "We're doing you a big favor, honey. Once I sang the lonely songs I loved. The A minor chord on my black Gibson hummed lonesome as a grave. I strummed right through their promises, crying, "Oh, the dreadful wind and the rain." On stage, I was one notch below the gap-toothed hayseed in his checkered jacket and short pants, clowning around with me as his sidekick, and we'd laugh and laugh. I dug on your grave the better part of last night. Too sorrowful, they said, the bosses. They'd heard enough about sick-hearted boys chasing aggravating beauties, poor orphan children dropping and dying in the snow. War was over, they said. Be old-fashioned, but not too much. How hard it was to fetch my voice for chirpier songs. Oh, the cuckoo, she never hollers cuckoo. I wore down. I mourned the women killed in all the murder ballads I knew, bludgeoned, stabbed, drowned, floated downstream to the Miller's Cove. He made fiddle screws from her little finger bones. I had to quit singing our songs. Her clothes all wet and muddy. They laid her on a plank. And here's a series of poems that I wrote that all have the title of Barn Dance. And again, these are composite characters, mostly the women who performed in early barn dance radio. Several of them, like Lily Mae Ledford, who was a Kentuckian, got her start at the National Barn Dance in Chicago. And when she arrived in Chicago, there's a picture of her. She was 19 or 20 years old. Her hair is pulled back in a real, sophisticated way, and she's got on a beautiful wool sweater and skirt, and she's holding her fiddle. And so, of course, the first thing they did to her was make her wear her hair loose. They put her in these sort of 19th century calico dresses with lace-up boots, and they made her play the banjo. Now, Lily Mae was a really fine banjo player, but she really wanted to play the fiddle. So that's just one example of the kind of things that those women had to endure. So here's a series of these barn dance poems. Barn Dance, Roadshow. Hungry as she was for fame, she never thought they'd change her name or dress her up in homely cloth and make her say those scripted jokes. She never thought she'd have to ride the waves of heat all summer long to hawk the barn dance radio in close school halls and fairground tents. No one said she'd bear alone the blues, the cramps, the damp-filled nights, the silhouettes on hotel walls, where her name in secret she would write in letters of bright gold. She couldn't know the sacrifice to sing the lonely songs she loved would be rough travel with quarrelsome men who never guessed her given name and didn't give a damn anyway. Barn Dance, Costume. Reject the lace petticoats, the rickrack hems. Reject the gingham bonnet stranglehold, the myth of calico for modesty's sake. Forsake the man whispering backstage your fate, his eyes green as dollar bills. Kick off your lace boots and ankle skirts and wail the blue notes that howl your heart's longing. Hop high and belt out the one about my Lulu gal, wearing that red dress from the railroad man and those shoes from a driver in the mines. Stay in the pit with the rough and the rowdy. Hop high, don't look behind. Barn Dance, Chorus. And the epigraph is from the modern songwriter Kathy Fink, Little Darling's Not My Name. And in this poem, all of the nouns that are used for names, most of the nouns in this poem were the actual names that a lot of these performers were given as stage names. Barn dance, chorus. It's not cousin, gal, honey, or sweetheart, not little miss, little maid, little Joe, little shoe, little sunbonnet. Our names aren't sister, girl, lady, or aunt. Listen, we had to play like one of the boys, cards, drinking, jokes, to hold our own on radio, at whistle stops, barn dances, schoolhouses, church meetings, and every blazing county fair in all the states they used for our names: Montana, Louisiana, Texas. Don't call us bluebird, songbird, nightingale, cricket, not sunshine, moonshine, violet, or sugar, not brown eyes, black-eyed Susie, Daisy, or laughing Lindy. Listen, if you want us, say the names our mothers gave us. Recall how we really were, raw-boned, standing spraddle-legged while we headlined those mean stages. Okay, and one more barn dance poem. This poem is about cousin Emmy, who was also a Kentuckian. Her birth name was Cynthia May Carver, and she was born around Glasgow, Kentucky. And she had this long career as a radio star. In fact, she never made any recordings until the late 1950s. So all through the late 30s, through the 40s, and into the 50s, she was this radio star. She played the banjo. One of the legends that goes along with Cousin Emmy is that she taught Grandpa Jones how to play the banjo. If you may remember that performer, he had a pretty successful career. So this is a poem about Cousin Emmy. She was a real character, and a lot of the management that was in barn dance radio did not like Cousin Emmy because she was independent. She used her money to pay her band members well. She toured in a Cadillac, and she wore big rings. So she didn't hang on to her money, she spent it. And she was fiercely independent. And so a lot of radio and studio executives didn't like her because she was fierce. So this is barn dance. Cousin Emmy remembers her show car. My brother-in-law always drove the show car, knew how to navigate every pig track and back road without a map, could drive safe in cities too, drop us at the loadout on time without a hitch. Cheerful he was and good-hearted, a big grin to match his wit, but Lord, he had enough of South Knoxville still in him to park that show car at a tilt under Ma'am's old shed and prop the door open, let his hunting dogs flop in the back like a doghouse. So if you were to come up on it, see that Cadillac full of old yellow dogs, you'd think we were right trashy. He kept the car shined up for us and always tried to clean the seats. But we were forever brushing dog hair from each other's hind ends before a gig. Blonde swirls and hanks we picked like strings, had to strum off quick as a drop thumb on the banjo. Okay, and I'll read my my poem that has Dolly Parton in it because I'm a Tennessean, and you know, I can't think of a single day of my conscious life that Dolly wasn't in it. When I was a very little kid, before I even started school, there was a local music show that showed on television, and it came on before Captain Kangaroo. So I'd be in front of the television waiting for Captain Kangaroo. But occasionally I would see a very young Dolly Parton who would come down from Sevierville into Knoxville and play on this local show. So even as a very early child, I have these images of Dolly. And when I was about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, Dolly came to Knoxville for a live performance, and my mother took her movie camera and made movies of Dolly as a teenager. And I've got the link for that movie too. If anybody wants to see it, you can see a young Dolly, and you can see me and my cousin riding ponies too. So this is about home movies, but also Dolly makes an appearance. I will always love you. My mother lifts her new Kodak Brownie 8mm from its copper suitcase. Come on, we're going to town. At the grand opening of the Fountain City SO, local politicians glad hand and cut the ribbon. All my favorite local singers are here. The Brewster brothers, Danny Bailey and Gloria Bell, Red and Fred, and a girl from Locust Ridge named Dolly. Mother flips up the viewfinder, squints and aims while the traffic roars down Broadway behind us. And Dolly, dressed in a homemade jumper, sings high and pure. Don't let me cross over love's cheating line. Weeks pass before I see the mute images unspool onto the wall of our darkened den. Hear only the two-toned hum of the projector, the percussion of the film clacking into the empty reel. Our truncated story plays out like a dream. Black bear cubs in the Smokies, a Sunday school party in my aunt's basement, Norris Lake, Dolly Parton, my mean cousin getting a whipping, 2 old women in black dresses sitting on a porch. Their hands are liver spotted, gnarled, entwined. Okay, I'll read a couple of poems from another part of the book. Here is one that barely made it into the book. I finished it actually after I had turned in the manuscript, and my acquisitions editor, Patrick O'Dowd, let me sneak it in. See if I can find it. Hang on just a second. It's called My Maternal People, and it's a sonnet. And the epigraph is from Dorothy Allison's memoir, 2 or 3 Things I Know for Sure. In my mama's photos, they stare out directly, uncompromising. I thought them beautiful and frightening. My maternal people. My maternal people are short and stout, thick-waisted with unshapely legs and ankles like blocks. In a silent home movie, the camera pans around the circle of women sitting in lawn chairs in the yard. They wear dresses, short sleeve shirtwaist with matching fabric belts that sit right under their ample bosoms. Their bellies round out softly like rising dough. My maternal people never wore shorts or pants. Some don aprons because they must move in and out of the hot kitchen, bringing food to men or to children who are in other circles. When they talk, my maternal people wave their heavy arms loudly, hefty punctuations signaling a punchline. Their hands are veined arrows, always pointing the right way. And here is a poem that I like very much. I like the music in this poem, and I can't often say that I like poems that I write, but this one I like. I hope you like the poems that you write. I heard somebody say that the other day, and I thought about how I'm not sure whether I like all my poems, but this one I do. I hope you will too. It's called Kitchen Waltz. Here is the kettle, and here is the spoon. A full moon in daylight splinters the sky. My mother is dead, my father too. Their plots are quadrangles, crooked and slumped. Here is the skillet, a halo of iron. 100 years' worth of hands have heaved it from sizzling fires, cornbread and grease and tedious days of crossing the floors to cook and feed and wipe the board dry. Here is the basin, and here is the rag. Here is the sorrow of hot, soapy water, chafing the wrists and blistering the heart. I don't know why, but I often get sad about my parents when I'm washing the dishes. I don't know whether it's because I'm in the kitchen and we spent so much time in the kitchen when I was growing up. Let's see, Amelia, how am I doing for time? Do I have time for more, or should I quit?
You have time for more, for sure.
Okay. Let me read a couple more from the book, and then I'll read a couple of new ones. Oh, I want to go back. I've got to scroll back. I want to read this crazy little poem I wrote about a dream I had about my grandfather, who I never knew. He died long before my parents ever met. And I had this funny dream. My grandfather was a musician, and I have his instruments. I have his fiddle, and I have his banjo ukulele, sometimes called a banjo uke or a banjolele. It's a banjo. It looks like a banjo, but it's only got 4 strings. And I think you actually tune it like a ukulele. This is called dead man's tuning. Dead man's tuning is a type of tuning that musicians use sometimes for fiddles. Dead man's tuning. Timberman welding an axe, a drunkard who yelled and hit. I can only concoct you, grandfather, for no one will say what you really were. Your photographs are mock-ups of my father and sister, crooked nose, brow turned firm over eyes bluer than steel. This much I know from what little I know. Your fiddle bow scraped through blistering days like a cross-cut saw through hardwood. Sourwood Mountain, wood chopper's breakdown, temperance reel. Your singing voice was coarse and high. An echo lumbers through this dream I had. You're teaching George Harrison to play your banjolele, both of you grinning and stomping your feet. There's a beautiful picture of George Harrison actually playing a banjolele, which I guess made me have that dream about him and my grandfather jamming together. It was a great dream, but unlikely. George Harrison, by the way, had a obsession with ukuleles. He collected them and loved them. And George was always my favorite Beatle. So I was happy to receive that dream. Okay, let me read. I'm going to read this poem about my mother, which I don't often read, but I want to read it tonight. It's about what happened after she became ill and moved into a skilled nursing facility in Knoxville. Herons on the Holston. I lift myself to see one alone on the shore as I channel my car in the back parking lot. My mother has settled here, a rest home, squatting heavy near the raw edge of a river in a forgotten part of a city where she has lived her once bubbly life. The Walgreens is closing and the schools are broken down in this old neighborhood. Daily, I remember no one will be left to ask the things unknown to me. The staff smoke at the back entrance. Past the storage trailers and the dumpsters, they can see the river, watch for the swell of wings, cambered and primeval as dust, drowsy as time. I lift myself to see one. Before I hold my breath and make myself dash inside, sprinting the hallway past the sunroom and laundry, gliding the corners into her room, a dim landing. I let go my breath and cross to the window just in time to see the heron's dowel legs dangling, feathers cupped in ancient arc, neck folded as an S, ascending in resolve back to the rookery. And one more poem about a heron. I love herons, and we did often see them on the riverbank at the place where my mother lived. This is called Ballad. Oh, and I have to ask if you know this expression, because if you don't, it'll be confusing, and it appears in the poem. Do you know the expression, the groundhogs are making coffee? If you don't, it's a mountain expression. Actually, George Ella Lyon was the one who taught it to me. I'd never heard it. But if you live in the mountains and you wake up one misty morning and you see mist up on the mountains, the old saying is that the groundhogs are up making coffee. That's what makes the steam. So that's what that phrase means. This is called Ballad. Sycamores jut above a daybreak wet with steam. The groundhogs are making coffee. The heron flies above the tree line, drumstick legs stretched rigid, wing flap on the upbeat like a crooked song wounding the sky. A family of house finches makes a dust bath in the gravels at the end of my driveway. They strum and pluck every shimmering day, while the worm entombs, while the bud weeps on the vine. I've been broadcasting seed in memoriam. My mother loved the killdeer. Her mother despised the blue jay, the melancholy of its cries, like a wretched old love song hummed over and again. Okay, I'll read a couple of new poems then. Is it okay, Amelia? Have we got time to do that?
Oh, you're wonderful. Please.
Okay. These poems are so new that I'm still editing them. So I've got markings all over them. I hope I can keep up with myself. I was thinking about my daughter when I wrote this poem and about her lineage and genealogy. You are sturdy as your grandfather's Pennsylvania Dutch dialect. You are sturdy as your grandfather's Pennsylvania Dutch dialect, tough as the tongue against the tooth ridge to say the sound of Deutsch and all its stereotypes, Dutchified, dumb, dirty. You are sturdy as the stiff necks of your East Tennessee great-grandmothers, their shadows shaping you on the sunniest days. You come from the slate factory. You come from the row of welders' hoods working the assembly line in Oak Ridge during the war. You come from tables laden with birch beer and chow chow, with scrapple and shucky beans. When the rafter of turkeys marches out of the woods into your aunt's front yard, they move as one to the next stand of woods. But the tom roosting on the fence post dreams of his dinosaur ancestor. A photo found under the couch is a faded image of our ancestor in winter uniform from the Great War. His wife died giving birth to their child. The child died too. The song that sounds in the wings of the buzzard is theirs, is ours. You are sturdy as your school teacher cousins writing lessons on blackboard in a practiced hand. You are hard as any day laborer, an arm out the window on the drive home after a long shift, reaching for the weekend. And this is a poem about writing, sort of. It's called Ars Poetica. I watched the rabbit happen from her warren into the sunlight this morning. We're both early risers, perched on the edge of the day, waiting for the weather to make up its mind. While I lean into my oatmeal at the window, the rabbit leapfrogs the high grass until she reaches the dandelion patch. She sucks down the stems like spaghetti, then chomps off the yellow buds for dessert. She takes her time in the sun, crouched so still in the open backyard that I wonder if she is sick or hurt. Her body leaves a mini crop circle in the grass when she finally hoedowns around the bend and out of sight. Yesterday, I watched a crow swagger down the hill while I washed the supper dishes. A mockingbird swashbuckled him all the way down the fence row until the crow finally flew off. His black wings make a pattern in my line of vision and a flutter in my chest that I can't name. Later, I will find a single black feather on the driveway, a tuft of fur pinched in the fence wires, left behind like turning points in a story I'll never finish, the ending feral and out of reach. And the last one. This is based on a Kim Adonisio poem. I borrowed the first line of her poem to make my poem. It's Kim Adonisio's Winter Solstice, if you want to look her poem up later. This is called Slick. I can't think about the black slick on the river or the deer who doesn't arise from the slick of its birth, the mother licking her fawn's wilting body. Does she hear the morning waking around her, the red fox niggling near the den, the squeal of the field mouse when clasped by the hawk? I can't think about another season of slicing cold as the days shorten and leaves slick the ground while darkness seeps across the day like another black slick back in the Gulf after yet another storm. Catastrophe never disappears. Pearly mussels are gone from fresh waters of Tennessee rivers, killed by men in suits who designed the dams to power the paper mills and chemical plants whose filth slicked more waters. I can't think about the strand of Tennessee pearls gathered like shimmery tears on my mother's necklace, now boxed in black velvet, and which I will never wear. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I I feel like you just gave me so many gifts, and I was just like writing lines down as fast as I could write them down. Um, I haven't had that infusion of like poetry, and so there's a couple things. I'm going to say a couple things, and then I'm going to try to ask some questions, and I'm not going to take all the time because
Okay.
I could totally like take all the time. So I was so glad that you read My Maternal People, because I opened the book, and that is the poem that I opened the book to when your book came, and I read that poem first, and then I was like, oh, and it's I've been trying to read poetry at night because I'm like, I'm going to do something good for my brain before I go to sleep, and I was like, I'm just going to read a couple. I'll just read a couple, and then I couldn't stop. So it was one of those things where I read, I think, the first two sections, and then I was like, I have to go to bed. But there's so much, it's so vivid. Like just listening to you read tonight, everything is so vivid, and I'm not sitting in my house. I'm with the birds, or I'm with your mother, or I'm with the music, or I'm watching the TV. Like I'm just pulled to these places so strongly that it was incredible to hear you read them, because now I can have your voice when I reread your book. So
Thank
I,
you. Thank you, Amelia. I'm glad I kept you up at night. Thank you.
oh my gosh, I like it was so good. It was so good. But it's one of those things where you're like, I'm gonna eat my dessert too fast. You're like, this is so good, but I'm really gonna read the whole thing. Just wonderful. And I haven't read very many books like that. Danny's book was like that for me too, where I was like, I'm just gonna read a couple. I'll just read a couple. And then I just kept going. But there's, I think, and this is not a question, it's just my statement, but there, the feminism and the poems about the women that are in this book, they transport, or at least they transported me in time, because there were so many things, like with the murder ballads and with the girl singer, that I was like, these are the things that are still happening. Like these things are still happening in all the places that women are going into, that we don't haven't had space for us. Like they're still happening. So there was such an interesting time travel thing to have happen that went all the way back with the murder ballads, and then like through the girl singer, which is closer. And then like I just, there were so many poems that just hit me that I was like, I read this poem, and then I'm reading the news on my phone, and it's the same things. So just really powerful to me in that
Thank you.
way. I do want to ask you a couple technical questions, because
Okay.
your brain is just like, how did you do this? So the book is in 3 sections, and I'm curious, and this may not be relevant, or it might be, but how much do you think that your like editor brain and your like writer brain came together in how this is organized? Because the organization of a collection is something that I'm just always fascinated by. Like, how did it get put together this way?
Well, that's a really good question, and I do get asked that question a lot, and mostly the short answer is I had a lot of help. I had a lot of help to put the book together. I didn't really do it on my own. I had it organized in a particular way where it was more, I don't know, atmospheric, but it didn't really tell a coherent story. It did to me. I mean, I knew the story. It made sense to me, but when other people looked at it, it didn't make sense to them. And so I had a lot of help. I actually hired 2 editors to read it. I mean, I paid them, professional editors to look at it. They made suggestions. And then when it came time to actually submit the manuscript for the consideration of the press, I had help with another editor who showed me that there were actually 3 sections, that it would be okay to make those real distinct sections, one about music and one about my family and one about nature. And some of the poems bled over and crossed the lines, but that was okay. And so I had a lot of help. And then when the manuscript was accepted, I had a few months to play around with it, and I made some more changes. But basically, I did what every poet does. I wasted a lot of resources and printed everything out on paper and then laid them on the floor and danced around them, which is really wasteful. I know that's wasteful, but that's what I did. Yeah. So I had a lot of help, because there were things I couldn't see myself that other people had to show me.
Yes. Oh, that makes me feel better to hear, because I felt like the sections all work so well, but there's like big threads and then there's little threads. It's like woven together so nicely. So in a really kind way, I'm glad that wasn't just your magical brain. That there was other help for me.
I don't have a magical brain, no.
You do. Um, my other technical question, and I know that other people have questions, so I won't ask too many, but I am just super curious about how you use the line and line breaks, because there's couplets, there's triplets, there's single stanza poems, there's a sonnet, there's so many forms in this book. But and somebody mentioned this in the chat, that your endings are very strong, but I also feel like your use of the line, like your line breaks are all very strong. And for me, like that's a deep attraction that I have, is how the line is used. So can you, I'm just curious as to how that works for you.
I a couple of answers I guess I can say. There aren't really any hard and fast rules about line breaks, but I think poets make up the rules that they want to follow for line breaks. So for me, I try not to ever use what I would call like weak words, like conjunctions or contractions, prepositions, maybe even pronouns. I try not to use those at the end of a line, and rather instead, I try to find a way that I can enjam the line so that at the end of the line, you think it's going to be one thing, but then when your eye goes down to the beginning of the next line, you realize that it's something else. For me, that's a great surprise in poetry, and I love when poets do that. The other thing I'm really pretty conscious of is beat and meter and that kind of thing. And what I do for myself when I'm writing is I usually make a container for myself. Like one of the girl poems, one of the girl singer poems, one of the ballad poems about Hazel Dickens, I wrote first in a hymn meter. I got the hymn book out and I chose a meter. And I said, okay, I'm going to do, and that just helped me get it down. It didn't stay that way, but it helped me get the poem down on paper so that then I could go back and edit it. So music, enjambment, and just being conscious about what's at the end of a line and whether or not that's a good thing to do. Like today, I had to turn in a poem for my teacher at Heinemann, Nicole Brown. We're going to finish up our class day after tomorrow because we didn't get to finish class because of the flooding. And so Jessica Swafford is in that class too. So we've been having to turn in a final poem. And so all day I edited my final poem and I worked really hard just on the end of the line. What's at the end of the line? Can I make that bigger, better, more interesting? So that's kind of how I go.
Yes. Oh, that's so nice to hear. Yeah, I feel like the line is so important, and you see throughout this collection the care that's taken with each of the breaks and then each of the forms that's chosen. But the idea of like picking a container and writing within the container.
Yeah. Like some of the containers were sonnets and then they didn't stay sonnets, or some of them were like there's a poem that describes birds and I made this little pattern. Okay, I'm going to do 3 lines, a certain amount of syllables and a certain amount of vowel sounds, I'm going to, and I got it on paper that way, so, and that would kind of stay pretty true to how it first came out on the page. But it's sort of a game. I have to play with myself, yeah, to get it on the page. It's hard.
That's really nice to hear, because these poems are so successful that it's nice to kind of see behind the curtain and know that you're doing some of the things that I think many of us are just trying to get it out and get it on the page. So that's really helpful to me. I have one more question, and then I will stop, because
Okay.
yeah, I'm just gonna have to talk to you about myself sometime.
Okay.
So I'm curious about this because it's a personal thing, but you have recently retired from teaching, and I know a lot of poets go into teaching, and so there's this sort of balance between those two lives of the teacher and the writer. And I'm curious, how did that work for you, and as you were teaching, to also be a writer? And then, um, do you have any predictions about how it's going to go um, in retirement?
My prediction is that it's going to go better in retirement than it did while I was, in the classroom, because I've been teaching full time since 1984, 5 years in Indiana, and then we moved to Kentucky in 1990. And I just I found it very hard to teach full time and to write. I found it very hard. When I would get home from teaching, it was most days it was all I could do to feed my family. I mean, everybody goes through that, right? It's hard to have kids and teach and write. So I was never really very good at that, at that. And that's one of the reasons why it took so long for this collection to come together. Some of these poems are 20 years old. Been working on them for 20 years because I just could not find the time to do it. But once the pandemic hit, and I was still teaching full time, but there were so many classes that were all of a sudden offered on Zoom that I could not take otherwise, that I just took as many as I could possibly afford to take. And I did more writing. I've done more writing in the past 2 years than I've maybe done in the last 20. And for other people, it's different. For other people, the pandemic was a killer. I can't write. I can't do anything. But for me, I was very productive and creative during the pandemic. And mostly that was because I was taking classes with deadlines, or, you got to show your work at some point, or you have to share, you have to read. And actually a lot of the classes I took were either free or they were very reasonably priced. I took a lot of Carnegie Center classes from the Carnegie Center in Lexington, which is actually where I started taking classes when we first moved to Kentucky. I studied with Letha Kendrick, who still teaches at the Carnegie Center. So I'm hoping in retirement, I'll keep this momentum going, because it is much easier to write when you don't have the responsibility of writing syllabus and, and taking care of 19-year-old boys who I generally despise, so sorry, but I do. The worst college students, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna not ask all my questions so that our wonderful audience can have a chance to also ask questions. So if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and go for it. Mary?
Yes, I'd just like to know, Marianne, are you a musician also?
I am. I played piano, and for about all my life, I was a church musician. I played the organ, and in southeastern Kentucky, that was pretty lucrative because there weren't that many people who played the organ and who could play hymns for church singing. That began to change, though, as more and more churches moved away from traditional hymn singing and more towards praise music, and the organ became kind of a dinosaur unless, it's a big church with a good steady stream of donors who can, afford the upkeep of the organ. But yeah, I can read music and play the keyboard.
Okay, thank you.
So when did you decide when did the concept of this book, The Girl Singer, actually form? Had you just already written enough poems where it started to seem like it was, coming together that way? Or did you start out saying, I want to write about this and write the poems for it?
That's a good question, Kathleen. Thank you. I wrote The Girl Singer first. The title poem was the very first one that I wrote. And I thought, you know, I've loved Dolly Parton and Loretta Lynn my whole life, and Jeannie Seeley and Patsy Cline and all these women I heard on radio and would see on television. And that's the kind of music my parents listened to, and it's the kind of things that we watched on television. We watched country music performers on television. We watched the Wilburn Brothers show, the Porter Wagner show. We watched Flatt and Scruggs. Later, we watched the Johnny Cash show and the Glenn Campbell show. And I would see all of these women with these terrific outfits and this huge hair, and and they all play guitar. And then, so that was kind of first, but I was always really fascinated with that, really fascinated. And then I wrote, and the other obsession I had and have had all my life were murder ballads. Like, I don't know, they're awful and they're horrifying, and I can't get enough of them. And I hate that they're almost always about women getting murdered, but there's something visceral and fascinating about murder ballads. My grandmother called them killing songs. And I remember being in the car with her once, and we heard on the radio, the Wilburn Brothers had a hit with Knoxville Girl, which is a murder ballad. And, so they're singing about my hometown and this woman who gets thrown into the water. And I'm thinking this is a true story, that somebody had thrown a woman off the Gay Street Bridge, and I'm getting kind of upset. And my grandmother just lost all patience and said, just be quiet. It's just one of those old killing songs. It's not true. I thought they were all true. And of course, really, they are based in truth. Most murder ballads are based in truth. So those two things, the obsession with the murder ballads and the obsession with girl singers, sort of just came together eventually.
Thanks. I was very curious, but I absolutely love the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everybody should go out and get it. Treat yourself.
That might be it, Amelia.
I just think that means I get to ask one more thing.
Okay.
I was like, I'm going to look at you like you're my class, and then when you blink, I'm going to wait. So I'm just curious, what are you reading? What are you reading now?
I just reread Two Brown Dots by Danny Quintos, which I love. I love that book. And I have also very recently been writing high buns, and so I'm really glad to see Danny's work in her book. So I'm reading that. I'm also doing the Seeley Challenge, which is you read a book of poems every day, and then you post about it on Twitter. So I've read, I'd have to look at my Twitter feed, but I've read Sharon Olds. I'm mostly reading poetry. I've read Sharon Olds. There's a new book of poems by Marlanda Dekine, Dekine, called Thresh and Hold. It's from Hub City Press.
Love him.
It's beautiful. It's about her ancestry in South Carolina. And it's gorgeous. I read that this week. I'm going to read Diane Seuss next week. So mostly right now I've been reading poetry. I just bought Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I know I'm behind and out of date, but I have not read it. So I'm going to try to start that. And I've also just bought, what's it called? well, I had it here and now I don't see it. It's the book about by Ed Young, the science writer for he does a lot of, oh, here it is. It's under my computer. An Immense World by Ed Young. It's about the perception of animals and how animals perceive the world and how different that is from humans. So it's nonfiction. I've started that.
That sounds really good. I've been on a nonfiction kick lately, but they're all real sad. So need to read something else. All right. Do you all not have any more questions? Because I'll let you go.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so grateful and happy to see you all.
Marianne, you were amazing. You
Yeah.
all need a copy of The Girl Singer. It is an incredible book. We are so grateful to have you with us tonight and to get to hear your voice reading those poems. Thank you. And please do keep in mind our members open mic, which will be next month, so September 20th. And Kathleen will host that. Sign up for that, especially if you haven't read yet, please join us. Those readings have been amazing.
It's so much fun. Yes.
That's fun.
And then we will have another featured reader in October. But before that, we will have our annual conference, the 8th and 9th, and that is open for registration. Thank you all for being with us. This was an incredible, incredible evening of poetry, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right,
Good
thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.